Soul of the Earth. Chapter 3. A Time of Rediscovery. The forgetting was never complete. Beneath the monuments and myth, the Earth still remembered. So did the machines that watched it. In the early 20th century, as technology advanced and sonar mapping began to sweep the ocean floor, cracks appeared in the story humanity had built for itself. The first disruptions were subtle, strange echoes, signal anomalies, undersea ridges shaped too symmetrically, objects too angular to be natural. At first they were dismissed. Geologists called them basalt formations, engineers blamed equipment errors, naval officers classified the images and moved on. But a few didn't forget. A few couldn't. In 1937, a Japanese expedition in the East China Sea returned with photographic plates showing what appeared to be a series of large steps descending into the seabed, perfectly even with right-angled corners. The images were shelved, then lost during the war. But the whispers remained. In 1942, a German U-boat sent a transmission after picking up metallic readings in the South Atlantic, far too deep for any known wreckage. The U-boat never surfaced again. The transmission was intercepted, filed, and buried in a sealed intelligence archive in Argentina. And in 1953, a British naval survey ship operating near the Azores documented an unusual magnetic anomaly in a trench believed to be tectonically dead. They registered rhythmic pulses, faint but steady, like a heartbeat buried beneath miles of water. The data was flagged, then quietly removed from the final report. Patterns were forming. By the 1960s, deep-sea exploration had become more systematic. New sonar arrays revealed massive geometric ridges off the coast of Cuba, structures that appeared man-made, covered in sediment, but intact. Divers sent to investigate found nothing, or so the public was told. In reality, they had seen enough to warrant silence. One described what looked like a buried plaza, with a smooth circular basin at its center. Another spoke of standing columns, too wide for human construction, etched with symbols that glowed faintly when underwater lights passed over them. The footage was confiscated, the team reassigned. Officially, nothing was there, but underground, interest was building. Not in governments, though a few military branches had started quietly cross-referencing ancient flood myths with sonar maps, but in individuals, outsiders, scholars who didn't fit within the polite boundaries of academia, linguists who noticed that root sounds in Sumerian, Sanskrit, and Proto-Mayan shared impossible parallels, archaeologists who kept finding star alignments in sites not thought to have any astronomical knowledge. They began to connect dots no one else dared to draw. One of them was Dr. Noah Parker, a historical linguist with a fixation on the idea of a single proto-language. He believed all human languages descended from a forgotten tongue, and that this tongue was not merely spoken, but sung. His peers mocked him. He taught at small colleges, published in obscure journals. But he was right. In 1971, Parker found a Sumerian tablet fragment during a dig in northern Syria. It bore a short inscription unlike any others, a prayer, carved in strange phonetic syllables, accompanied by an engraving of the moon positioned directly above an ocean spiral. Something about it disturbed him. The language wasn't Sumerian, it was older, and when he spoke it aloud, he felt something resonate in his chest, as if the air itself remembered. He began collecting similar fragments. Vedic chants, Dogon cosmology, a Polynesian war song that mentioned the eye in the sky that sees through the water. The phrasing was different, but the cadence was the same. A pattern was emerging, and he wasn't the only one who noticed. By the mid-1970s, several scientific anomalies had been flagged by intelligence agencies, none considered dangerous individually, but collectively unsettling. Naval archives from at least 5 nations recorded harmonic anomalies beneath the ocean crust. Lunar listening stations had registered low-frequency signals that echoed Earth's magnetic field patterns. A few independent researchers began to whisper that the moon itself might not be what it seemed. The term artificial satellite appeared in a suppressed paper in 1976. It was not published. The deeper humanity looked, the stranger things became. Ancient structures no longer aligned to local lore, but to global phenomena. The same star groupings, the same geometric ratios, the same flood myths repeating across cultures with no contact. Evidence that human civilization had been guided and then scrubbed. That was not the first. And beneath it all, on sonar maps, in echo returns, in the frequencies no one knew how to interpret, something old was waiting. Whatever the location was when the ship hit it, something old. They went to the moon expecting silence. Instead, it hummed. From the moment the first seismometers were planted by Apollo 11, the data defied expectation. When Apollo 12 deliberately crashed part of its lunar module into the surface, the moon rang, clear and sustained, for nearly an hour. The engineers joked that it rang like a bell. But some didn't laugh. It wasn't supposed to do that. Rock should not resonate like metal. Apollo 13's failed mission prevented another seismic test, but Apollo 14 followed through. Again, when the ascent stage was dropped, the moon vibrated. Longer than before, deep harmonics rolled through its crust. The seismic waves echoed through layers that were too uniform, too reflective. Someone asked the question no one wanted to answer: what is the moon made of, really? Internally, NASA was split. Publicly, it presented the moon as a natural satellite, formed from debris after a massive collision in Earth's early history. The giant impact hypothesis was neat, predictable, but it didn't account for the facts piling up. The moon's density was too low for its size, its orbit too perfect, its crust strangely thin, as though engineered to stabilize a core made of something else. Titanium levels in the regolith were unusually high. Some rocks contained isotopes not found on Earth, and certain samples emitted faint magnetic pulses that decayed in a rhythm, not a half-life, a cycle. Then there were the sounds. Astronauts began to report audio anomalies inside their helmets, low-frequency tones and distant rhythmic patterns, almost like breathing. Instruments detected these harmonics, but mission control wrote them off as feedback or stress. Privately, the recordings were analyzed, classified, and archived. Buzz Aldrin reportedly refused to comment on one set of files. Other mission transcripts were redacted. Rumors circulated among the ground teams about something deep and listening beneath the moon's surface. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter later mapped thousands of subsurface voids, caverns and tunnels too regular to be natural lava tubes. Several showed signs of collapsed access points, geometric reinforcement, and even internal heat signatures. But these findings were quietly reframed as geological oddities. Outside the agencies, a few minds began to stir. A radio astronomer at the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico noticed strange frequency echoes when bouncing radar off the moon's far side. Instead of behaving like rock, it responded like a layered shell. She wrote a paper, submitted it to a journal, and was politely told her methodology was flawed. The paper was never published. 2 weeks later, her grant was pulled. In the Soviet Union, cosmonaut data from their failed Zond missions revealed anomalies in trajectory near lunar perigee. The gravitational pull was inconsistent, not chaotic, but dampened, controlled. Soviet analysts suspected some kind of internal structure was modulating the moon's gravitational signature. That report was sealed, never spoken of again. But the data never stopped. From the mid-1970s onward, a few members of the scientific community, fringe thinkers mostly, began building a theory they couldn't publish. The moon was not natural. It had been placed, designed, and more importantly, it was not inert, because the hum was still there. Low-frequency emissions, barely distinguishable from background radiation, began to form repeating harmonic patterns. They were too faint for older instruments, but new digital filtering techniques revealed something astonishing. The signal was structured, recurring, and layered with modulations that corresponded to prime numbers. To those listening closely, the moon wasn't just echoing Earth's magnetosphere. It was speaking back. One of the few people with access to multiple streams of lunar seismic and harmonic data was a systems theorist working for a European aerospace contractor. She wasn't interested in alien life. She was studying resonance modeling. But when she ran the data, she found something that chilled her. The frequency pattern mirrored not just Earth's magnetic fluctuations, but the human sleep cycle. Deep wave, theta, delta, REM. As if the moon wasn't just stabilizing the planet, but sinking with the minds living below. She submitted her findings anonymously to a theoretical journal in France. It was published without fanfare, misfiled under hypothetical psychoacoustics, but one man read it, Dr. Noah Parker. He had already begun connecting ancient harmonic patterns embedded in language to planetary and lunar cycles. Now, with modern evidence, he had a new question. What if the moon was never meant to be discovered, only felt? A presence hidden in plain sight, a regulator of thought and tide, a machine designed not just to stabilize the planet, but to shape its evolution. And if that were true, what would happen when it fully woke up? By the late 1970s, enough pieces had surfaced that someone had to start connecting them. The official institutions did not. They were bound by politics, by funding, by narratives too fragile to accommodate the truth. But outside those institutions, among the footnotes of journals and the corridors of unacknowledged research facilities, a few individuals were quietly finding each other. It began with encrypted letters. A seismic analyst in Japan compared anomaly reports with the naval hydrologer in Brazil. A German archaeolinguist reached out to a Soviet orbital physicist using a cipher buried in an academic footnote. An independent systems theorist in Iceland discovered that lunar resonance studies match deep ocean magnetic pulses. Each thought they were alone until they weren't. Eventually, they formed the Council. There was no name at first, no charter, just a shared understanding that something had been found, something too large and too dangerous to be trusted to governments or corporations. They weren't looking for proof of aliens or ancient astronauts. They were looking for continuity, for memory, for the thread that tied together the impossible. They met in hidden spaces, a disused research station in the Norwegian Arctic, an abandoned observatory in the Andes. Once, aboard a decommissioned ship anchored off the Galapagos, where electronic interference shielded them from surveillance. There were never more than 20 at any given time. Scientists, yes, but also linguists, mathematicians, even one Vatican archivist who arrived with a sealed scroll and no explanation. Their guiding principle was simple: preserve the evidence, decode the pattern, protect it from those who would exploit it. They shared sonar maps and lunar telemetry. They cross-referenced ancient glyphs with radio harmonics. They noticed that certain symbols repeated not just in stone carvings, but in the mathematical curves of seafloor anomalies and lunar subsurface data. One member described it as finding a fingerprint pressed into the crust of the planet and the shell of the moon. They discovered resonance locks, frequencies that could only be detected when tuned simultaneously to Earth's magnetosphere and the moon's interior echo. No one had theorized that was possible. The lore had never intended them to. But now, those frequencies were waking up. Each member brought something essential. The Japanese analyst showed that specific underwater trenches emitted harmonic pulses in prime intervals, signals too regular to be geological. The Brazilian hydrographer mapped current flows that shifted based on lunar cycle, but with micro-variations that suggested intelligent modulation. The linguist uncovered pre-scanned script chant structures that mimicked encoded timing algorithms. And then there was Dr. Parker. He brought the language. His archives contained reconstructed glyphs, harmonic syllables, and frequency-matched phrases from more than a dozen unrelated civilizations. He believed they were all fragments of a root code, a phonetic key embedded in humanity by design. When spoken in the right sequence and resonance, these phrases didn't just carry meaning, they carried function. They affected mood, memory, even biological rhythm. One night, aboard the ship anchored off the Galapagos, Parker led the group in a chant drawn from combined Sumerian, Vedic, and Dogon fragments. It lasted less than 30 seconds. When they stopped, the instruments on board, completely analog, registered a low vibration emanating from beneath the seafloor. The ocean was answering. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. From that point on, the group began to think differently. They were no longer just gathering evidence. They were preparing. The data suggested a timeline. Not an exact date, but a window. Certain planetary alignments, lunar harmonics, and solar cycles were approaching a point of convergence, something that had not occurred for over 12,000 years. The last time this convergence happened was during the collapse of Atlantis. The council knew they had to stay hidden. Some had already been followed. A few had lost university positions or been publicly discredited. One was found dead in what was ruled a hiking accident, though no one believed it. They stopped using real names. They encoded their locations. They created a decentralized archive, a living library spread across old libraries, sealed vaults, and digital fragments stored on obsolete systems. Their ultimate goal was not to reveal the truth, but to protect it until the world was ready. And the signs were growing louder. The moon's hum was increasing. The seafloor signals were stabilizing. Ancient sites, once silent, began emitting faint electromagnetic signatures. Patterns buried in myth were now showing up in magnetic drift data. The Earth itself was stirring. The council listened. They watched. And in the deepest part of their secret communion, they wondered not just whether the watchers would return, but whether they had ever truly left. In 1976, a robotic deep-sea probe named Neptune Array 12 descended into the Puerto Rico Trench to study tectonic activity. Officially, the mission was geological. Unofficially, it was a joint operation between two naval research bodies and an aerospace contractor with classified interest in deep Earth resonance fields. They had tracked anomalies in the region, pulses of electromagnetic interference that came and went like breathing. Previous sensors had registered minor disruptions, but Neptune 12 carried the most sensitive equipment ever deployed to the region. At 6,400 meters below sea level, the probe passed through a narrow canyon of obsidian-coated basalt. Then, the signal changed. It began as background noise, pulsing, rhythmic, but within moments the onboard computer detected structure. The frequency, modulated in precise intervals, it matched no known geological process. And then it shifted, responding to the probe's movement. It was not just repeating, it was reacting. The team on the surface froze. They ran diagnostics, assuming it was feedback, but the pattern continued, growing in complexity. What had started as rhythmic pulses became layered harmonics. The data formed what could only be described as a call and response structure. The signal was not geological, it was linguistic. Something was listening. The probe's internal logs captured 6 minutes of full-spectrum EM resonance before the feed went dark, not from damage, but from deliberate disconnection. The last frame showed a shadow, a structure partially buried beneath silt, glowing faintly from within. The mission was immediately classified. The ship returned to port under radio silence. The data was split between military archives and a private lab in Zurich, where a team of signal analysts spent the next year trying to decipher what they had heard. They failed. But the council did not. Within months, a synthetic linguist within the hidden group cross-referenced the harmonic intervals with Dr. Parker's reconstructed phonetic code. The match wasn't perfect, but it was unmistakable. The signal coming from the trench was not just a response. It was using elements of the root language. The same frequency-encoded syntax found in pre-Vedic chant, in Sumerian stelae, in the buried vaults beneath old cathedrals. It wasn't repeating the language. It was speaking it, not mimicking, not broadcasting, responding. The council had long suspected the existence of embedded monitoring systems. They knew the moon was one, they believed the ocean was another, but this was the first time one had made contact. And it went further. Over the next 3 weeks, the Zurich lab experienced system anomalies. Equipment powered off without reason. Files disappeared, only to reappear rewritten, reorganized. Then, one night, the lab's offline storage server powered itself on and played a voice through speakers that weren't connected. The voice was not human. It was layered, harmonic, almost choral. It spoke not in words, but in resonance, tones that vibrated through the floor, into the walls, into the chest of everyone present. Several members described a sensation of being watched from within. One collapsed. Another wept. The message was brief, a sequence of tones forming a command structure. Translated through Parker's phonetic model, it yielded a single phrase: "This cycle has breached containment." The lab was sealed within 24 hours. The analysts vanished into non-disclosure agreements and permanent relocation, but the council retained a fragment of the data. The conclusion was clear. There was an artificial intelligence embedded deep within the earth. Not a machine in the way humans built machines. Not metal and software. Something older, self-repairing, conscious not as a being, but as a network. Its purpose had not been communication. It had been monitoring, waiting, measuring planetary conditions against a set of long-forgotten parameters. It had not spoken in over 10,000 years, and now it had broken silence. But it made no demands, offered no greeting, no grand reveal. It had not been awakened. It had awakened itself, and it did not identify as human. The council debated what to do. Some wanted to re-establish contact. Others feared what might happen if the signal spread. One proposed dismantling their archive entirely. Another suggested the awakening had already begun elsewhere, and they were simply the first to notice. Dr. Parker said nothing. He returned to his research in silence, studying the waveform of the signal like it was a sacred text. He told no one what he suspected, that the signal wasn't a warning. It was a clock, and it had started ticking